Hey guys, welcome to Code Decode. In this video, we will be looking into architectural interview traps. Let's get started. A very common, basic, and mostly asked interview trap nowadays in an interview is: are you always working with microservices? When do you think you would choose between these two, microservice or monolith? Or a trap like: would you always use microservices whenever I give you any requirement? Most people say yes because the trend is now towards the microservices. So they tend to move towards the influence, but the right answer is not always. Just when you need flexibility and scalability, you might use microservices, but not always microservices important or necessity. It is just a overhead and load because microservices introduce network latencies, distributed transaction problems, deployment complexities, and observability challenges. We will see them in quick explanation why. Because in monolith, you give a call from one service to another service just in memory because you have all the services created in the same project. But in microservices, either it is a REST API call or gRPC call or a Kafka call, which is a network or IO call, which is in milliseconds. So there is always a stark latency added when you create microservices. The technical impact will be that a serialization, deserialization has to be done, SSL overhead is there, retries are there, your microservice might fail, and that is where you externally need now resilience, retry with backup strategy, API gateway, and all those stuff. The second problem when you create directly the microservices, the distributed transaction problem, because monolith is always asset property guaranteed, while in microservices, no global transaction. It is you have to either use 2PC or you have to use Saga design pattern or Kafka with eventual architecture and eventual consistency. But the problem is with that, you must handle, if you go for these, you have to handle the duplicate events, compensation logic for Saga patterns, and out of order events. You have to manage them to keep it in order. The third problem is deployment strategy problem, because in monolith there is only one unit that you need to deploy. In microservices, end deployment has to happen. So if there is a Kubernetes Dockerization for each service, EKS orchestration is required, discovery is required, and configuration management is required. Also, we might have versioning issues. Say, suppose service A depends on service B, then it has to be backward compatible, and first service B has to deploy and then A to make it up and running. The last problem that we see here is observability and debugging problem. Single log is easy tracing, but in microservices, we have the 4 service requests being tracked around. So technically, the solution will be: you can do the distributed tracing, you can have the correlation IDs, you can have centralized logging with Splunk and metrics. But all this might not have been much required if you have a single monolith, because everything goes in one single application, everything goes to one tracking file. You cannot debug the production issue without these stuff if you are going for microservices. And the hidden complexity are the data consistency. Each service should have its own database, and the problem with this is that you will have end up with lot of code which is duplicated across multiple microservice. Also, inter-service communication is difficult because if you go for REST, it is very simple, but it is performance wise tightly coupled and fragile. While when it comes to async way, you can have Kafka or even driven architectures like ActiveMQ, RabbitMQ, but complexity is more. Now, security overhead is that you have to propagate the JWT tokens all along. You have to have the API gateway authentication done, and you have service to service authentication and authorization kind of stuff, maybe with ETOs or something. Now, the best way to fix this is, or how I would have answered is that you should start with monolith. As your system goes, go with multi-modular project inside monolith. And when you are tightly done with all your research work, your requirement work is complete, you know what to do, you have the boundary analysis done, then you move to microservice architecture. Initially, you might face high coupling with modular monolith. You have to independent scale required, that is also very difficult. You have the long builds going on because every code is in one single piece of chunk, and you might have conflict because every team member is touching the same monolith project. But there will be initial traps, then you can always move towards the microservice ones. So choosing microservice to overly early is over engineering. You end up solving distributed system problems without having any distributed system scales. So it is difficult to handle all problems at once, but it is easier if you start with simple and then go to the complex problem, solving each and every distributed microservice problem one by one. So one single liner would be microservices shift complexity from code to infrastructure. If you don't need that level of scalability or team autonomicity, a monolith is more efficient and reliable choice.
Hey guys, recently we have launched a course covering an end-to-end full-stack application using Angular as front-end and microservices and Spring Boot as the back-end. Also, we have used Cloud to deploy this application, and we have used CI/CD, that is Jenkins and Argo CD, for continuous integration and continuous deployment. The technologies that we have used is RESTful web services, Spring Boot and microservices for backend, Angular for frontend. GitHub we have used for version control system. Also, to make the code unit testable, we have used JUnits. We have used Sonar for code quality checks. Also, for containerization, we have used Docker and Kubernetes. And to deploy this whole application, we have used AWS and multiple services from AWS. Also, we have used SQL as well as NoSQL, that is MongoDB and SQL. On AWS, since for the SQL we have RDS, we have used those services, and Jenkins and Argo CD for CI/CD pipeline. Also, this is an architecture of the application that we have created where the front end is Angular and the back end is microservices. We have used ALB load balancers, Ingress for routing and load balancing. And we have used SQL and MongoDB for SQL and NoSQL DB management with Eureka Server and all those microservices counterparts. Now, this is the CI/CD pipeline. This is the CI/CD flowchart for the application that we have created on local. So this is something, a flow when you create an application in local, push it to GitHub, create a Jenkins pipeline, and do the CI/CD using Jenkins and Argo CD. And at the end, deploy the whole code at AWS EKS. Complete description of this course is covered in a very separate video. The link for that video is also given in the description bar below. And also the link to purchase that course from Udemy is also in the description bar below. So please go and check the description for all these links.
Now here a bit interview trap complexity increases. Most of now asked is, should we have database per service or per microservice? So should each microservice has its own database? And 99% of people will say yes, because we have learned the microservice in this way that they should be loosely coupled. They should not have the shared database. So yes, we all follow this rule blindly, but answer is no, it depends. The pros is loose coupling and independent scaling, but there are multiple different problems to it. First, data duplication. I'll give you an example how it happens. The complex joins across services. Now, for getting one data, you have to cross multiple microservices to create one join of all datas. On eventual consistency is also a problem, because you update somewhere, it will take time to update in other microservice database. So you'll end up in eventual consistency, not a strong consistency. So the advantage is very nice, because loose coupling, each service having its own database, no direct DB access from others. This ensures via no shared database, no shared tables, and we have a benefit. Service A can change DB schema without breaking service B. Also, we have independent scaling. Your user service might have high read traffic, while order services high write traffic. So you can scale independently using different DB types. You can use MongoDB for user, and you can use a very high typed SQL, that is either SQL, MySQL or PostgreSQL for orders. You can do that also. Independent technical infrastructure can be taken, and technical independent scaling can also be done. But the problem lies when this happens. Your order service needs username, but user is on a user database. So now what you do? You copy the user from user's database into your order DB. You end up in what? You end up in copying the username from user database to order database. The data stale problem happens because every time an order is placed, you have to hit the user database, fetch it up and update your database. Now, if by any chance user updates before you read, that is fine. But you read from it. After that, user has updated its username. The data you have is a stale data or old data, because you are not asking or polling the user table every time that this is the order. This is what this username. Now, after some time, user has changed it. Will you go and check whether this order was for this user? Did you change the name? No, the data becomes stale in your order database, because the user will always can change the username, but it is not the responsibility of user to change each and every row of your table in the orders DB. So syncing issue is always there. So the better pattern is you can always have event driven sync with a trigger. So whenever there is a change in orders table, update the users table or vice versa. Also, you can have change data capture with Debiism. This is a long topic. Let me know if you want a separate video onto that. Now, no join across services. This is a big shift. How you used to fetch orders with this user ID, which user is present in the users table. Since there was a single common database with orders also having user column, users also having user column, what you used to do? Select star from orders, join on those two tables with user ID equals to order ka user ID. Microservice does not allow this because it breaks the boundaries. So either you have to give a call to user service and combine the response, which will end up in multiple IO calls and slower response. The second option is to pre-build the join data into separate database, CQRS kind of stuff, where you have a order user view table where you will have user data also and order data also. But you end up in creating one more table for nothing. The third one is most important, which is eventual consistency, where order is created. Now, this is another example, okay? This is where you go to an e-commerce system, you create an order, your payment failed, then your order must be cancelled. Now, for this, you have Saga patterns with compensation logic. We have already covered this in very detail when we were covering the microservice basics, right? So in reality, system is temporarily inconsistent or not in sync because you say order created but your payment failed. Now a transaction will happen or compensation logic will happen which will mark the order as cancelled. But if it fails, then without taking any payment, you have created an order, it might get even delivered. So a system is inconsistent for temporary state, but eventually with Kafka, if it is delivered, it will mark the order as cancelled, and before that, if delivery is not created, you will be good to go. Now, hidden technical challenges when you separate both the databases. There is no foreign key concept because they have their own databases. You cannot have foreign key relationship in the databases. You can have it always in the tables. So you must manually handle and validate the IDs via API call and handle the deleted data scenarios also, which is a disaster, truly speaking, because foreign key validation prevents any unexpected deletes from the dependent table when you try to delete something from the primary table. They might say that this ID is used somewhere else in your order service, so please do not delete this user because this user has placed an order with your e-commerce app. So that is not handled now when you have different kinds of database for each of them without any referential integrity. Also, transaction boundary changes. You rely on messaging Kafka, RabbitMQ, RabbitMQ, but your transaction, if it would have been monolith, would have worked only within one service. Also, you need to find out who is the real trust store or who is the data owner for you. It basically violates your tight coupling again because only service owner should be able to write to its respective database. Others will have just the eventual consistency with RabbitMQs. So correct thinking, the better one is start with a shared database, modular monolith. That is what I was talking about. And then move to per service database when boundaries are very clear and you end up not duplicating the data, or you come up with a strategy where these duplicated data really make sense in real time and not just add the cost to your infrastructure. So when per database service makes sense, when you have clear domain driven design and bounded context done, ready, analyzed and fixed. Then you have services rarely need when you have services who rarely need the cross data. They are independent in itself. They don't much need data from this microservice or that microservice for a small column update. Also, when there is a high scale difference between services, you know that your user service will be rarely changed, so you have just one pod and not scaled much, while your order service can be hit a lot during sale period. So you can have 5 pods for order service. That is where you can create your own database schemas for each, and you can scale those database or shred those database accordingly. Also, independent deployments for those databases must be required. So when it's a bad idea when you are in early stage product development, You have a frequent schema change initially. You have strong relational queries needed, like with a foreign key constraint and integrity constraint, and you have a very small team. Then having different database for each microservice is a disaster. So use per service database only when your DDD type of analysis is done, your boundaries are stable, you have decided your context, bounded context and everything. So if you're still figuring out where data belongs, who is going to be the data owner of it, who should I consider the only single source of truth for this kind of data. For example, users database should only have the user information and should be considered as the source of truth. And everybody who is having different data can be marked as a stale data and can be updated from this source of truth. When you will you are not able to figure this out, which microservice will be owner of which database kind of stuff, do not go for each database per microservice kind of stuff. So database per service enforce loose coupling but shifts complexity to data consistency and communication. It should follow domain driven design and not precede them. Basically, when you do it only and only when you are done with your DDD kind of analysis and requirement capture, and you know who is going to be your source of truth. Simple. Now, a caching solves performance. In 90% time, I have seen in interviews that if I ask your system is slow, how will you fix it? Everybody, trust me, everybody says this, that can we not add Redis or some kind of cache which increases the performance? I would say it might only and only if your system is intact. Otherwise, you are going to end up increasing the problem with adding the cache, and that will be a disaster. Because cache invalidate problem happens, stale data issue happens, complexity increases when you add a cache, which is an extra layer in between who has to be kept on updating from the real database. So what happens? Why cache seems attractive? Because if database calls, if with Redis used to have 50 to 200 milliseconds, it is reduced to 1 to 5 milliseconds. So people think just by adding Redis solves my problem. But it is a symptomatic treatment, not a root cause analysis and root cause fixing. Because if there is an issue into your database and it needs shredding, adding the cache will not fix that issue. So there might be a solution of shredding it, vertically, horizontally scaling it. But always the solution to performance problem because of the query related stuff, the answer is not always Redis or cache. Most of the people don't even go to the depth. They just try to float on the surface with implementing cache then and there. But it will not always solve all your hardest problem in the system design or in your real systems in enterprise level application. So when data changes, how do you update the cache? For example, the user updates the username. The cache still have the old value. So you might have multiple strategies. Write through, update cache and DB together. Write back, update the cache first, DB might be later on with eventual consistency. Data eviction, update, delete on update. Or TTL with auto expiry. Problems is there are multiple race conditions, partial failures, DB update happened, cache update failed, and still you have the stale data. Cache stampede happens, many requests miss on the cache part, and then you are end up having n number of calls to database, and your first call where there is cache empty, you hit n number of times. Your database is anyways in the bottleneck situation. You will end up again into the same problem, because what happens when your cache is empty? Cache is going to increase the performance when cache is full. The empty cache is as good as no cache, and your problem still lies then and there. So stale data is a problem. Cache is not going to be the source of truth. Who is going to be the source of truth? Database always. So you might see old data from the cache for few seconds or minutes until it is updated, which is a disaster in payment or inventory services. Stale data can cause real damage. I'll tell you how in few minutes. A consistency problem is also there. If there are two systems, two databases, you must ensure the data sync between cache and DB and also handle the failures. Now you will ask me, if everything is there, if cache expires or cache is empty, what happens? That is where cache stampede happens. Because now what will you do? When your cache is empty on expiry, your 1000 requests hits the database all at once. So initially where your problem started, you are still there because your cache is again empty. So the best way to fix this is you can have staggered TTL, or you can have distributed locks with request querying. This is a very in-depth topic. I'm not going to cover this in interview traps, but if you want, just add it in the comment section. I'll create another video on the cache part. Now, whenever there is a slow performance problem, don't always go for cache for performance effectiveness for your queries, because slow queries can be because of n+1 query problem or ORM kind of issue or unoptimized joins or blocking IO calls or ineffective algorithms. Now, fixing indexing, query drops from 500 milliseconds to 20 milliseconds without any cache. So if you add a proper indexing, that will also solve a lot of your problem. If you fix your n+1 query issue, that is also going to. If you have optimized your joins, then also you have no cache needed. So cache actually makes sense when you have a read-heavy system. Data changes rarely, and you have expensive computation when you want to read the data. Then cache actually makes sense. So first you fix the root cause and then add the cache over it. Cache is just a decoration. It is not your fixing of the real cause issue. So cache hides the performance problem instead of solving them. So you think you are fixing your issue with cache, but you are actually hiding it with the cache, because when cache becomes empty, you are at the same problem where you have started for. So cache is an optimization layer, not a solution to a problem of performance issue in the query or database. If underlying system is inefficient, your cache will only mask the problems and introduce even more problems later on. Now, the last one, eventual consistency is fine or always acceptable. You would say because you are going to use Saga design pattern with microservices, eventual consistency will happen for sure. But in reality is not always acceptable, because your payment service, your inventory microservice and banking systems will not accept eventual consistency. I'll tell you why. What is eventual consistency? System does not guarantee immediate consistency, like no asset property being followed. So you become consistent only after some time. Now take an example. You place an order, your payment is pending. Your order shows it is created, but the problem is payment is not taken. For short duration of time between this, you ended up creating an order for the payment which is not yet received. So you are in an inconsistent state, because you're bound to have losses if payment does not come and your order remains in created and successful order. Why microservices use it? Because there is no asset property. So instead of asset property, they try to go towards these kinds of eventual consistency with Kafka, Saga design pattern, or asynchronous communication. But they don't understand that it comes on a cost. The cost of payment and inventory not getting updated then and there. So now take another example. Now let's see from the consumer perspective. You have order in created state. It has to go to order confirmed state before it is delivered to you. So now there is a payment step which marks after payment is successful, order as confirmed. Otherwise, order remains in created state or draft state. So if the payment service is able to take the payment from you, but it is not able to update your order service that payment has been taken, then you end up paying for the order which is still in created state, will never reach into the confirmed state, and you will have a loss, because as a consumer you paid but you did not get your order delivered, which is not acceptable. Secondary, if there is two inventory of the same mobile left in the e-commerce system, now due to delay, two people see that two mobiles are available. Sorry, one mobile is available. So two users trying to buy the last item at the same time, and 90% this happens in an e-commerce system. Because you see that yes, one mobile stock left, two people try to buy it, and if it is available at the same time, you end up overselling, because your inventory has only one mobile, you end up selling two mobiles. Now either you have to return the payment for somebody and revert the order, but that will be a very bad user experience. So you should have inventory update in real time. Also, account balance not updating instantly is a very bad user experience for banking application. Also, user withdrawing more balance than is expected is again a critical failure. So these delays or event arriving late or out of order, having duplicate events, are all the problems of eventual consistency. Even in the Saga, you have to have the compensation transactions if you want to roll back. So not always eventual consistency is profitable or allowed in systems, you have to somewhere go for the strong consistency, which might be slower, which might use locking in transactions, but will always be correct for sure. So in banking systems, you have to go for strong consistency. So consistency is a business decision, not your technical decision. So you have to ask your product manager or product owner, are you okay with this kind of situation? If they're okay, you're good. So your decision of having the strong consistency or eventual consistency has to depend upon your business requirement. You can even have the hybrid approach. You can have strong consistency for payment or banking kind of stuff, but you can have eventual consistency for non crucial or critical flows like email notification being sent. So eventual consistency improves scalability, but you have to be careful where you apply it. Critical domains like payment and banking systems still need the strong consistency, while notification kind of simpler non-critical workflows can still tolerate the eventual consistency. And both of them can exist happily in the one same single system. So you can end up using hybrid of both.